Hello, I'm Jeremy Ford and I'm going to show you how to do a spring landscape with chalk pastels. And I've got my paper on my board, so I'm ready to go. I'm going to just do some initial drawing with a pale grey colour to divide the land from the sky. And now I've got a mid to pale blue, and I'm going to break this in half and just use part of the pastel. And using the pastel sideways on, not pressing too hard, sideways on over the sky area, moving it around in different directions, and then using my finger, blending this in all different directions, and a little bit more, just to fill in all those little gaps in the paper. This is a light grey pastel matte paper. It's a wonderful soft paper specifically for pastels, and it grips the pastel really well, minimising dust. Now I'm going to add a little bit of white to that, so making the sky a little bit lighter, again using the side of the pastel and maybe the tip here and there, and just work that in a bit. And you can either use your finger for doing this, or if you prefer, you could use a pastel shaper, which is just a plastic implement which does the same thing. I don't mind using my fingers because the paper's nice and soft, but some pastel papers can be a little bit harsh to the touch. Now, along the horizon, we're going to have some trees, and again using the pastel sideways on, spread that out, and then over the top of that, work in some darker colours. The pastels I'm using are Ashby Soft Chalk Pastels. These come in a nice range of colours, which I can use for all my pictures. Now, working in some darker colour here and there, and over on the left hand side there's going to be a large area of trees, and some of the greens that you get with pastels can be a little bit garish, but you can overlay colours, work colours into one another, a bit like mixing colours in a palette. So I can work in some browns and greys for calming colours down, and then again using a finger, work that in to the paper. You can put light colours over dark colours and dark colours over lighter colours. And one of the advantages of this paper is that you can build up layer upon layer of pastel. You can put your light colours over the dark colours over the light colours, without disturbing them too much. So if I get some nice yellow, I can put that over the top of the dark for a bit of sunlight here and there. Just grow this tree a little bit here, using the pastel sideways on, and just a suggestion of a few branches with leaves on, using the tip of the pastel, just a few light highlights here and there. And then the grass. Now this is a sunlit field, and there will be bluebells in this field. Pastel's ideal for this kind of subject because you can get a nice misty effect. So in between that sunny grass colour, we'll now have some bands of bluebells and some darker colour in shadow, bluebells in shadow, using the tip of the pastel here for a little bit more control, and then back to the greens in and amongst all this. And using the edge of the pastel again to cover a larger area. And varying it a bit, so varying the colours here and there, so we don't have too much of just one colour. And an almost brown colour here, and even some black. Now I want to blend these colours in using a cleanish finger. Work the pastel backwards and forwards and let those colours mingle with one another. And it doesn't matter if any of this gets a little bit muddy or a bit dirty. I can put light colours on top of the dark. Again, I can bring back some of the light, then I can go over it with the bluebell colour. Some more sunlight in the distance. Now in the foreground I'm going to have some longer grasses, so I'm using my finger in the direction that the grasses are growing. I'm working a little bit of blue with that violet as well, so it's not too purpley. This is a sort of a cobalt blue colour. It's important to keep the white clean, so make sure your hands are clean every time you pick the white up. And a little bit of white over the top of these bright sunny colours just accentuates the sunlight. Another advantage of pastel matte paper is that it doesn't smudge too much. On some papers you can smudge the pastel almost completely across the paper. With pastel matte you can just move the pastel enough to work it into the paper without completely rubbing out what you've done. Now in the foreground, some of these grasses, using the edge of the pastel, this is a pale yellow, perhaps a lighter green would be good as well. The more pastel you put on, the more dust there will be, and you can either just blow the dust away, or you can get a little piece of tape to pick up some of the dust. Just touch that on and lift it off. Across the left-hand side here there's going to be a big tree, and I'm just going to lift off some of the pastel so that the next colour I put on will take more easily. And to do that I can use either of these two brushes, about here, and now with a light grey, we've got the tree across the left-hand side here, and some pale green. And dark grey. And black. Now I'd like to soften some of the pastel, but my finger will be a little bit clumsy for doing this. So I'll use the pastel shaper to soften the pastel, to work it into the paper. And the white to catch some highlights on the bark. And then blend some of that in a little bit, just softening the colours, working them into together. A little bit of pale green as well. And then there'll be lots of branches coming off from this tree, so using the edge of the pastel, this is the black, using the edge of the pastel, lots of different angles, not pressing hard at the end. I'll soften the edge of some of these branches with the pastel shaper, and also use the pastel shaper for doing some fine twigs. And a few highlights on the edge of these darker branches with pale yellowish green. And any finer twigs and branches can be done with the charcoal pencil. Lots and lots of fine twigs, and some of these will have buds on them in a minute. That's okay. Now I want to put some more detail into the lower area, so we want some nice bright green grasses, and we'll put a few bluebells in a minute. Now using the end of the pastel, sort of dotting, just to give the impression of bluebells, the darker violet, and some blue. Pale grey for patches of sunlight here and there on some of the distant bluebells. Darker greens, and then just a bit of black around the base of the tree amongst all these flowers and grasses, just to give it a bit of depth, and a little bit on the bark here and there. Just smudge those a little bit. Doesn't matter if you overdo it, and even if you rub out some of the flowers and the grasses, you can put them back again. Not trying to be too fussy about drawing individual flowers, but it's more of an impression, Just lots of interesting colours. Larger shapes right at the bottom here, and just a few lighter grasses with very bright greens and yellowish greens at a slight angle. Darker greens and brown even. A few white flowers here and there. And then we just want a few buds on some of these branches, different greens, just tiny little dotted marks with different greens. Darker where it's blue, so they stand out. The leaves are just coming out, and a bit darker still. Even some grey. Lighter yellowish greens where the background's darker. Just a few finishing touches to these background trees. I'm just going to lighten some of the dark violet on the right hand side and on the upper left here. Just like to make it a little bit gentler, so I'll put a bit of lighter violet and a little bit of pale grey over that area, and the same higher up here, so it's slightly less harsh. So there we have our finished spring picture. So to recap, I started with the sky, worked my way down the picture from the background into the foreground, doing most of the middle distance before doing the tree and finishing off with the immediate foreground at the bottom of the picture. And the final touch was adding the buds to the branches.